The Dawning has finally returned, and with it has came a brand new weapon alongside all of the old weapons with the brand new perk pool. So in this video, I want to answer the question if there's any you should be farming for and what the god rules look like on them. Now this video is just going to be me reading the perk pools on D2 Foundry and just nerding out what I think is going to be the best for mainly PvE, but I do talk about PvP a little bit here and there. So if this is something you enjoy or you learn anything new, consider doing all the normal YouTube stuff. It really does go a long way and I truly appreciate it. Alright, so jump right into it. I want to start off with the new weapon, the Albedo Wing. This is going to be a aggressive frame glaive that does arc damage. The perks that can come on this are going to be Grave Robber, Beacon Rounds, Replenishing Aegis, Immovable Object, Keep Away, Clown Cartridge, and Field Prep in the first column. Then the next column is Golden Tricorn, Demolitionist, Left from Gold, Deconstruct, Attrition Orbs, High Impact Reserves, and Close to Melee. So for PvE, I think most people are going to be building this for melee damage, but it does have the new perk of Beacon Round, so when you get a kill with the weapon, it can actually make the projectile track. I think this has the potential to be pretty fun. I don't know how useful this will be in PvE in my opinion, but it definitely could be a fun option if you want to play into like a shooting build of it. I think that could be pretty good, but I think for the most part, most people are going to go with Close to Melee. So whenever you get a glaive projectile kill, you actually increase your melee damage, and then get in any melee damage or projectile hit will actually extend that duration. So this is just a nice damage buff for your melee. Then obviously a great thing to pair with that is going to be Grave Robber, because every time you get a melee kill, you will reload the weapon. As you see, this does have a magazine of 3, so it has a very low magazine, so being able to reload, get a glaive projectile kill to proc Close to Melee, you can keep this up pretty much all the time, and you will just have a permanent 30% damage increase for that melee. Now if you are running the melee build of it, I would definitely recommend Swap Max so you can increase the ready and stow speed, and then I would also go with Tempered Truss Rods to get 15 handling and go with something like a handling masterwork just so you can swap to it really quick, get your melees off, and just go to town with it. Now we already have a glaive like this that you can craft, and that's the Judgment of Kelgaroth, but that one is solo damage, this one is arc. So if you want a weapon similar to that but that does a different element, this is definitely what you could go for. Now if you want to go for a more fun option, you can go with the shooting aspect and go with something like Beacon Rounds to get that tracking, and then you can also have Golden Tricorn just to get some extra damage. Since it is arc, your things like pulse grenades are very strong on pretty much any class, so you can have the max Golden Tricorn, which is 50% damage, which can be very fun, and you can just kind of shoot away. You don't really ever have to aim. But with this, since it does have a 3 magazine, you will need a bunch of reload speed or just a way to increase the magazine size. So I don't really know if you want to go into the shooting aspect of this. Maybe it could be pretty fun, but I think for the most part, just go with something like Close to Melee and Grave Robber, and it will probably get you more bang for your buck. But if you want to go for a fun roll, this is definitely something you can try out. Or even if you want to take off Beacon Rounds, if you don't need the tracking, you can maybe run something like Field Prep so you can crouch, get that reload speed. Or you could even take things like Keep Away, which seems pretty awful for a glaive since the whole point is to be close to people. But if you're sniping with it, you know, maybe this could be pretty good. But I think for the most part, like I said, you're going to probably go with Grave Robber Close to Melee, and that's what I would look out for. But now let's move over to the Stay Frosty. This is a lightweight frame stasis pulse rifle. This is going to have the perk pool of Encore, Tunnel Vision, Moving Target, Killing Wind, Offhand Strike, and Light in Action and Heating Up, alongside Desperado, Headstone, Kill Clip, Head Seeker, Under Over, Attrition Orbs, and Collective Action. This does have a lot of good PvP perks. Things like Moving Target, Head Seeker is very good. Obviously Desperado, Kill Clip, just anything like that. But for PvE, when this came out originally, it didn't have that crazy good rolls, but this time around it actually does. You have things like Headstone, which is obviously going to be very good. If you're playing into a primary weapon that goes in that kinetic slot or your first slot, you pretty much are always going to want to play into its perk, and obviously since this is stasis, it's Headstone, because elemental weapons just do less damage than a kinetic weapon. So if you are running a primary that goes in that slot, you might as well have it kinetic to do more damage. So with that being the case and this being stasis, I would pretty much just always recommend Headstone. But if you want to run something like Kill Clip, that could also be pretty good, or Desperado as well. And now the best perk in the left column is for sure going to be Enlighten Action. Now the other perks obviously can help you out in PvE, but these are for sure more for PvP. But with Enlighten Action, while you're doing damage, you get this up to max axe. You get max reload speed and handling, with reload speed being the more important one, but handling is also a nice little addition to have. So you're getting a lot of reload speed. You're going to be able to stack this up extremely easy since it is a pulse rifle, and then you also have your Headstone procs, again, that can play into all your stasis subclass. Now if you are going with this specific role, I would definitely just recommend going with something like Accurized Rounds to increase your range, maybe something like Hammer Forge, and if you want to take the cut in some of your stats, Full Bore is also a pretty good option just so you can have as much range as possible. Tack on a range masterwork, and now you have a long range weapon with max handling and reload speed and the ability to make stasis crystals, which is very, very nice. I don't think this is going to overtake other headstone weapons that we already currently have, but if you don't have one and you want one that's themed around the Dawning, this is definitely one I would recommend getting your hands on because it is pretty good if you are, again, playing into stasis. And next up, we have Zephyr, which is going to be a stasis sword, and this will have the perk pool of Unrelenting, Relentless Strikes, Duelist Trance, Wellspring, Tireless Blade, Turnabout, and Adaptive Munitions. In the second column, Vorpal Weapon, Surrounded, Whirlwind Blade, Chain Reaction, Cold Steel, Attrition Orbs, and Collective Action. So this does have perks like Surrounded and Vorpal to get your damage up, which are always going to be very nice, but I think for the most part with this, most people are going to be playing into Cold Steel since this is going to be a stasis sword, so every single time you get hits, you'll apply slow stacks, which eventually can lead to freeze and shatter, and it's a pretty good perk, honestly. Now, the best perk to pair with this is for sure going to be Relentless Strikes, so you can do light attacks on a boss like crazy, constantly slow them, freeze them over and over again, and this can make for a pretty okay sword, especially if you are playing into stasis builds. Now, the other perks you would definitely want are Swordmaster Guard and things like Jagged Edge, because this will increase your charge rate, so you can do your heavy attack a little bit more often, and Jagged Edge will give you the most impact, and then your impact masterwork, you get up to 68 impact, and this is pretty much the god roll I would recommend trying to get for this weapon. Again, you can play into things like Surrounded and Vorpal to increase your damage. Even things like Collective Action might not be the worst. You could just pick up any elemental thing that will give you a 20% increased damage for 7 seconds. That also is just another little damage perk. And even things like Tireless Blade can also grant you some ammo back, but in reality, Relentless Strikes is probably just going to be better for that. Unrelenting is also not terrible, but again, I would definitely play into Cold Steel since this is a stasis sword. Relentless Strikes gets your ammo back, you get your power attack back faster, and you get as much damage as possible. And next up, we're going to have the Cold Front, which is an aggressive frame kinetic SMG. Now, the Cold Front honestly does have a little bit of a fan base, and the perk pool you're going to get on this is things like Perpetual Motion, Unrelenting, Subsistence, Stats for All, Tap the Trigger, Enlightened Action, and Rewind rounds, alongside Rampage, One for All, Frenzy, Rangefinder, Cascade Point, Attrition Orbs, and Deconstruct. Now, for PvP, you can obviously crank the range up. You have things like Rangefinder, Perpetual Motion. You're going to have a pretty solid roll, but I don't think this is going to be better than any other SMG that currently is rated supreme in PvP. But for PvE, you do have things like Rampage to increase your damage. For Ad Clear, One for All is going to give you a 35% increase to damage just by hitting 3 targets, which is nice. Frenzy is also a pretty good option. Cascade Point's fun for both PvE and PvP, but I don't really know where it will come in too much for PvE. And then in the other column, you have things like Subsistence, so you can just keep adding ammo back to the magazine every time you get a kill. Stats are all again, so hitting 3 enemies give you a bunch of stats. Light Action's also not terrible, and I guess you can also make Rewind rounds work a little bit, but I wouldn't recommend it. So for me, there are 2 roles you should be looking out for. Things like Subsistence Rampage is just a very easy option. You get kills, you get more damage, the gun reloads itself. You don't really have to think about it too much, but with this playstyle of trying to increase your damage and trying to not reload, I think you can get more bang for your buck with things like One for All and Stats for All. Now, with Stats for All, you do have to reload, but as you see, if you hit 3 targets, you are going to get a bunch of reload speed, a bunch of handling, a bunch of range, and also some stability. And then that is going to pair extremely nicely with One for All. So hitting your 3 targets is not only giving you all the stats, but you are now also getting a 35% increase to your damage. With 54 reload speed, you can also build into more things like Flare Magwell to give you even more reload speed. You can then take something like a reload speed masterwork and get you up to 79 reload speed, which is very, very nice. And then if you want to pair this with something like Arrowhead Break, you can get up to 98 handling with 100 recoil direction. If you want to max out that handling, you go with Fluted Barrel to get 100 handling. And you already have 92 recoil direction, so you don't need Arrowhead too much, but if you just like that 100 stat, Arrowhead is a great option. And as you can see here, you just have a very, very stat heavy focused weapon with crazy fast reload speeds, and you get one of the highest damage boosts in the game. And since it does do kinetic damage, you are getting more damage than any other elemental weapon, so this is honestly a pretty good option for an SMG in your kinetic slot. And if you don't have something like the Val, the Disciple machine gun, this is honestly a pretty solid alternative. Now, next up, we have the Avalanche, which is going to be an adaptive frame solar machine gun. This is going to have the perk pool of auto-loading holster, subsistence, dynamic sway reduction, surplus, stats for all, rewind rounds, under over, and alongside that, adrenaline junkie, incandescent, vorpal weapon, cascade point, target lock, and One for All. Now for PvP, things like dynamic sway reduction, maybe even surplus, are going to probably be your 2 best options. And then in the other column, cascade point, you could probably have some fun with it, but the best option is probably going to be target lock. So if you want to have a PvP machine gun, this is definitely what I would go for. But for PvE, you have things like incandescent, which is very, very good for ad clear. You even have things like One for All, so kind of like the Cold Front, you hit 3 enemies, you can get some damage. But with a machine gun, if you are using this for ad clear, it kind of already does enough damage to kill the lower tier enemies anyway, so that's why one for all I wouldn't recommend. But with things like Incandescent, you can spread that damage around and it will also play into your subclass. Now with this, you can also build into Subsistence, so every single time you get a kill, you will put ammo back in the magazine, which is very, very nice. You can constantly just keep shooting this over and over again, constantly apply Scorcher everywhere. And then again, it also does have things like stats for all, so maybe stats for all, one for all, but again, you don't really need that extra damage, so I don't think this is as important. But if you want to play into just have a bunch of reloads before it, since it does have the Shiro Synergy Order trait, which doesn't matter too much in PvE, you could do that. But I think overall the best option for this will be Incandescent, Subsistence, since you can just mow down a bunch of ads with this. Now if you are building into it like this, Extended Mag is going to be your best option, so you can get as much ammo as possible, so you can just constantly keep shooting without having to reload. And then I would go with something like Arrowhead Break to get that 100 recoil direction and then have that extra handling. And then for your masterwork, things like range can be very good, but I would almost just build into more handling, just so you could swap this weapon a lot faster, because you really use this to mow down ads, and so you could just swap to it, you know, never have to reload, constantly get kills with Incandescent. And this, in my opinion, is the best thing you could craft on it, but it does have another role with things like target lock and rewind rounds if you just want to shoot at a boss with it. But this is an adaptive frame. It's not a 900 RPM, so I wouldn't recommend it. If it was a 900, I would definitely recommend getting a roll like this just to have it just in case. But since it is mostly just built for ad clear, in my opinion, this is probably going to be your best roll. And finally, we have Glacioclasm, which is going to be a high impact void fusion rifle with the perk pool of Slide Shot, Subsistence, Repulsor Brace, Under Pressure, Killing Wind, Heating Up, and Overflow, alongside Reservoir Burst, Golden Tricorn, High Impact Reserves, Eye of the Storm, Fragile Focus, Control Burst, and Successful Warm Up. Now I know this weapon has a pretty loyal fan base when it comes to PvP with things like High Impact Reserves, Under Pressure. It is very, very easy to get your one-shot kills, but even things like Slot Shot and maybe even Eye of the Storm, since you have to charge the weapon up, could be pretty good. And I'm sure there's also a play with something like Successful Warm Up. You could definitely have some pretty interesting PvP rolls with this. But for PvE, the main go-to perks you're going to be looking out for in the second column are for sure going to be Reservoir Burst or Control Burst. Now, you can kind of intertwine with these two, and I'll get back to this in a second. But in this column, the main perk you're going to be looking out for is Overflow. Overflow is crazy, crazy good. As you see, it has a 5 magazine. When you pick Special Heavy up, it goes to 10. You could also run something like Slot Shot if you would like to, maybe Slot Shot Reservoir Burst. But even in my opinion, with Reservoir Burst, Overflow is still going to be your best option. Now, in your batteries, in my opinion, taking accelerated coils is pretty much going to always be your way to go for PvE, because you can just get that increased charge time. But if you want to go with something to increase your magazine, since you are playing into Overflow, that is also not that bad of an option. Then I would also just recommend something like Arrowhead Break just to get maximum recoil direction. You could also get some extra handling, but if you want to go with a range stability, since it is fusion, that is nice, but obviously that's more important for PvP than it is PvE. And I think just having the extra handling is always good just to swap to your weapon faster. And then for your masterwork, always go with charge time again, because with charge time and accelerated coils, this will actually stack and give you the fastest charge time possible, which is not only going to be good for DPS, but also good if you are running something like Reservoir Burst just to shoot it a little faster. But now between Reservoir Burst and Control Burst, with Reservoir Burst, this is going to be your ad clear option. It does actually also give you increased damage, so when you shoot the first shot in the magazine, you get more damage and you make enemies explode. But since you have Overflow, this will let a lot of your shots actually proc this, so it can be kind of okay for single target damage. But the main thing is, if you get a kill with it, it will make enemies explode, and it can do some pretty good ad clear. Now, for the DPS option, Control Burst is going to be slightly better, because when you land all your bolts, you get faster charge rate alongside also doing increased damage. So this is extremely good, since this is a high impact frame. You're going to have a bunch of charge rate with Control Burst, things like accelerated coils and the charge time masterwork. And this is going to perform just like the Aramite does. If you have a god roll of that, or if you've crafted it, you know how good it is. It's one of the best DPS fusion options in the game, other than obviously the Scatter Signal that just came out. But this is basically the Aramite, but void. So this is something I would highly recommend keeping an eye out for. And if you can't get this, I would definitely recommend it, because this has the potential to be one of the best fusions you can use for DPS. And since this is void, if you are running something like a tractor cannon, all the void mods that you can run will actually synergize with each other, because now if you run something like tractor cannon and Aramite, you can't really synergize them, but this one's void, so now it can. And I think this has potential to be very, very good. But all right, that is all of the dawning weapons that we can get this year. There are definitely some nice ones, and the new glaive, I guess, is kind of cool, but I don't really see a lot of people use this unless that beacon rounds perk is very, very strong. But the weapon I'm definitely excited to try to get the most is for sure the Glacioclasm with that Control Burst roll. There really isn't any other fusion rifle in the game that is void that can perform like that. But also even things like Stay Frosty, since it does have a pretty good PvE role this time around, I'm excited to try to get that as well. And always having the Zephyr sword with stasis is a fun option too. But as we just went over, each of them individually do have some pretty unique roles, and they're all something I would definitely keep an eye out for. Anyways, though, that's going to do it all for me. I wish you all the best of luck if you are farming for any of these weapons. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day. Peace.